Good morning, I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News Now, coming to you from our digital desk. We're going to be taking you live to the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas for the sentencing of a man who has been found, this is a verdict? Okay, the verdict for a man accused of voting twice in the 2020 election. You're seeing there James Saunders, accused of voting twice, both in Ohio and in Florida, both in 2022 and 2020. Let's take you live into the courtroom.
July 12th of 2023. On April 19th of 2023, Mr. Saunders was indicted with 2 counts of election fraud, one with an offense date of October 21st of 2020 to November 3rd of 2020, and the other with an offense date of October 9th of 2022 to November 8th of 2022. This matter proceeded to a trial before this court on July 12th of 2023. During the course of trial, the state presented testimony from Anthony Gallagher, the Deputy Director of the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections, Tiffany Washington, the Voter Services Manager at the Broward County Board of Elections, and Special Agent David Lurkey of the Bureau of Criminal Investigations for the state of Ohio. The state also submitted Exhibits 1 through 41, which were admitted without objection. Based on the evidence presented at trial, this court makes the following findings of fact and conclusions of law. Ohio voting activities. Saunders registered to vote in Ohio on September 14th of 1988. At the time of his initial voter registration, Saunders provided the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections a residence of 16210 Shaker Boulevard, Shaker Heights, Ohio, 44120. His current voter information report on file with the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections lists this same residence and also lists an active phone number of 216-577-0166. The signature on file shows the name James Dalton Saunders, clearly legible and written in cursive. Beginning with the June 2nd, 1992 primary election and through the November 2nd, 2022 general election, Saunders has been eligible to vote in each election and has elected to vote in 38 of the 47 total held elections. His Ohio voter status is listed as active as of January 19th of 2023. Further, there does not appear a time where his voter status in Ohio was ever revoked, amended, or suspended for any reason. With regard to the 2020 presidential election, evidence established that Saunders elected to vote early and in person at the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections. He appeared at the Board of Elections and cast his ballot on October 21st of 2020. The signature used by Saunders on that date matched his signature on file with the Board of Elections. Further, the poll book used at the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections on October 21st of 2020 shows Saunders' registered voting address of 16210 Shaker Boulevard in Shaker Heights, Ohio. With regard to the 2022 general election, evidence established that Saunders voted in person and at his polling location located at Woodbury Elementary School in Shaker Heights on Election Day, November 8, 2022. Saunders' listed address on the voting checking sheet is 16210 Shaker Boulevard, Shaker Heights, Ohio, 44120. Further, the signature he presented on that date matched what was on file with the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections. Florida voting activities. Saunders registered to vote in Florida on July 8th of 2009. Saunders' voter registration receipt shows a listed residence of 405 North Ocean Boulevard, Penthouse 23, Pompano Beach, Florida, 33062. However, his mailing address is listed as 16210 Shaker Boulevard, Shaker Heights, Ohio, 44120. Notably, this is the same address listed as his residence in his Ohio voter registration. The signature on file appears to match the signature on file with the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections with the name James Dalton Saunders, clearly legible in cursive. He provided an active phone number of 954-782-4764. Evidence established that Saunders has voted in Broward County general elections in 2014, 2016, 2020, and 2022. His Florida voter status is listed as active as of February 3rd of 2023. Further, there does not appear a time where his voter status in Florida was ever revoked, amended, or suspended for any reason. With regard to the 2020 presidential election, evidence established that Saunders initially submitted a vote by mail request on October 24th of 2020. In this request, he specified that his ballot was to be mailed to 42 6th Street Northeast, Pulaski, Virginia, 24301. Although he was mailed a vote by mail ballot, one was never returned. Instead, Saunders voted in person at his polling location at St. Gabriel Catholic Church on Election Day, which was held on November 3rd of 2020. His voting pass from this day shows a listed residence of 405 North Ocean Boulevard, Pompano Beach, Florida, 33062. Further, the signature he presented matched the signature on file with the Broward County Board of Elections, with James Dalton Saunders, clearly legible and written in cursive. With regard to the 2022 general election, Saunders requested a vote by mail ballot from the Broward County Board of Elections on October 9th of 2022. In requesting a vote by mail ballot, he specified that his Florida ballot was to be mailed to 16210 Shaker Boulevard, Shaker Heights, Ohio, 44120. The signature he used to request this ballot is the same signature used in prior ballots and on file with both the Broward and Cuyahoga County Board of Elections. Saunders received a ballot, signed it on November 2nd of 2022, and it was received by the Broward County Board of Elections on November 5th of 2022. His voter certificate from this election lists a home phone number of 954-782-4769 and a mobile phone number of 216-577-0166. In regard to the overlapping voter activities in 2020 and 2022, in regards first to the 2020 presidential election. Saunders first voted in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential general election on October 21st, 2020, when he appeared at the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections and cast an early vote. 3 days later, on October 24th of 2020, Saunders requested a vote by mail ballot from the Broward County Board of Elections for the same November 3rd, 2020 presidential election. He requested that his vote by mail ballot be sent to 42 6th Street Northeast, Pulaski, Virginia, 24301. Cell phone records for 216-577-0166, which has Saunders as the listed subscriber, established that sometime between October 22nd, 2020 and November 1st of 2020, Saunders left the greater Cleveland, Akron, Ohio area and arrived near Pulaski, Virginia. Broward County records show that Saunders' vote by mail ballot was delivered to Pulaski, Virginia address on October 26th of 2020. However, This vote by mail ballot was never returned. Cell phone records for 216-577-0166 established that Saunders then drove from Pulaski, Virginia area to Savannah, Georgia on November 2nd of 2020. Then from Savannah, Georgia to Pompano Beach, Florida on November 3rd of 2020. The presidential election was then held on November 3rd of 2020. Records then proved that Saunders voted in person at his Broward County, Florida polling location on November 3rd of 2020 at 3:09 p.m. The signature he presented on that day has the name James Dalton Saunders, clearly legible and written in cursive, which matches the signatures used by Saunders when he voted in person at the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections on October 21st of 2020 and matches the signatures on file with both the Broward and Cuyahoga County Board of Elections. 2022 general election. Between the 2020 presidential election and the 2022 general election, Saunders received an address confirmation final notice from the Broward County Board of Elections. The purpose of this mailing is to confirm or update a registered voter's address. At the time this mailing was sent, the Broward County Board of Elections had Saunders' registered address as 405 North Ocean Boulevard, Pompano Beach, Florida, 33062, and asked whether this current information is correct. Saunders put an X through the answer yes, signed the document with James Dalton Saunders in cursive and clearly legible, and returned it to the Broward County Board of Elections on or about July 22nd, 2021. Regarding the 2022 general election, Saunders requested a vote by mail ballot from the Broward County Board of Elections on October 9th of 2022. This request was specifically for the November 8, 2022 general election. In this request, Saunders specified that his Florida vote by mail ballot was to be delivered to 16210 Shaker Boulevard, Shaker Heights, Ohio. Saunders received a ballot, signed it on November 2nd, 2022, with the same legible cursive signature of James Dalton Saunders, and it was received by the Broward County Board of Elections on November 5th of 2022. Saunders then voted in person in the November 8, 2022 general election at his Cuyahoga County polling location located at Woodbury Elementary School in Shaker Heights, Ohio on Election Day. Saunders' listed address on the voting check-in sheet was 16210 Shaker Boulevard, Shaker Heights, Ohio, 44120. Further, cell phone records for 216-577-0166 show that Saunders was in and around Shaker Heights on November 8 of 2022. Revised Code 35991282 makes it a crime for any person to vote or attempt to vote more than once at the same election by any means, including voting or attempting to vote by absent voters' ballots and by regular ballot at the polls at the same election, or voting or attempting to vote both by absent voters' ballots under Division G of Section 3503.16 of the Revised Code and by absent voters' ballots under Chapter 3509. This statute thus requires a finding that an individual, 1, voted or attempted to vote more than once, and 2, that those votes were cast at the same election. Throughout the trial, Saunders argued to the court that the absence of a mens rea in Revised Code 3599.12 requires this court to apply a reckless mental state to this offense. However, the 6th, 10th, 9th, and 12th districts have all held that Revised Code 3599.12 is a strict liability offense. This court also believes that the 8th District would follow the general consensus throughout Ohio and hold Revised Code 3599.12 is a strict liability offense. Thus, this court finds that Revised Code 3599.12 is a strict liability offense and no mens rea is required. However, even if this court is to accept Saunders' argument that Revised Code 3599.12 requires a reckless mental state, there is evidence to establish this mental state beyond a reasonable doubt. A person acts recklessly when, with heedless indifference to the consequences, the person disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the person's conduct is likely to cause a certain result or is likely to be of a certain nature. Regarding the 2020 presidential election, Saunders voted in person at the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections on October 21st of 2020. Cell phone records establish that after he cast his vote, he first drove to Pulaski, Virginia, and Savannah, Georgia, on his way to Pompano Beach, Florida, where he arrived on Election Day, November 3rd of 2020. He then voted in person at St. Gabriel Catholic Church in Broward County, Florida, on Election Day, appearing at 2 different polling locations in 2 different states to cast a ballot in the same presidential election in less than 2 weeks undoubtedly evidences at least a reckless mental state. Regarding the 2022 general election, Saunders requested a vote by mail ballot from the Broward County, Florida Board of Elections on October 9th of 2022. Saunders received a ballot, signed it on November 2nd of 2022, and it was received by the Broward County Board of Elections on November 5th of 2022. He then voted in person at his polling location located at Woodbury Elementary School in Shaker Heights on Election Day, November 8th of 2022. He signed his Broward County vote by mail ballot 5 days before he voted in person in Cuyahoga County. Saunders' argument that he accidentally voted in these 2 elections, or that he could not remember if he voted in Florida when he cast a ballot in Ohio, must be viewed in light of his previous voting activity in these 2 states. During the 2014 general election, Saunders voted in person in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, and by mail in Broward County, Florida. During the 2016 presidential election, Saunders voted by mail in both Cuyahoga County, Ohio, and Broward County, Florida. And as has been previously outlined, Saunders voted in person in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, and in person in Broward County, Florida during the 2020 presidential election. This evidence clearly shows Saunders' history of voting in the same election cycle in Ohio and Florida since at least 2014. As a result, his arguments that his actions in the 2022 general election were accidental or done without his knowledge are unbelievable. Therefore, even if Revised Code 3599.12 required a reckless mental state, such mental state has been proved beyond a reasonable doubt. The offense of election fraud requires a finding that an individual voted or attempted to vote more than once. As previously outlined, Saunders voted in person in both Cuyahoga County, Ohio, and in Broward County, Florida in the 2020 presidential election. He then voted by mail in Broward County, Florida, and in person in Cuyahoga County, Ohio in the 2022 general election. The state has presented evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to prove that Saunders voted or attempted to vote more than once during both the 2020 presidential election and the 2022 general election. The offense of election fraud also requires a finding that an individual voted more than once at the same election. Federal law states that the Tuesday next after the first Monday in November in every even-numbered year is established as the day for the elections in each of the states and territories of the United States. The evidence in this case proves beyond a reasonable doubt that during both the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election and the November 8th, 2022 general election, Saunders voted at the same election prescribed by federal law in both Cuyahoga County, Ohio, and Broward County, Florida. During trial, Saunders advanced two arguments on this point. First, he argued that this court is without jurisdiction to consider the voting acts that took place in Florida. Second, he argued that any voting that occurred outside of Ohio cannot be considered at the same election because issues, ballot measures, and candidates are different between these two states. This court finds no merit to these arguments, but will discuss them both in turn. Throughout trial, Saunders repeatedly advanced that the argument that this court is without jurisdiction to consider any act that took place in Florida. This argument primarily concerns the 2020 presidential election, as evidence established that Saunders voted in person in Florida after voting in person in Ohio. He argues that his vote in Ohio was done legally, and this court's jurisdiction does not extend to actions within other states. Therefore, there is nothing inherently illegal about his actions in Ohio. Pursuant to Revised Code 2901.11A1, a person is subject to criminal prosecution and punishment in this state if the person commits an offense under the laws of this state, any element of which takes place in this state. Further, Revised Code Section 2901.11 is to be liberally construed to allow this state the broadest possible jurisdiction over offenses and persons committing offenses in or affecting this state. An element of the offense of election fraud is voting or attempting to vote more than once. Voting more than once requires both an initial vote, then a subsequent vote thereafter. In the 2020 presidential election, Saunders first voted in Ohio on October 21st, 2020. He then drove to Florida and cast an in-person vote for the 2020 presidential election on November 3rd of 2020. Casting a vote in Ohio, while not itself an illegal act, is an element of the offense of election fraud. Pursuant to Revised Code 2901.11A1, this court is not divested of jurisdiction over Saunders' subsequent Broward County, Florida vote during the 2020 presidential election simply because another element of this offense took place in a different jurisdiction. Thus, this court finds Saunders' jurisdictional argument to be without merit, and this court has jurisdiction to consider his voting activities in both Ohio and Florida, as they both make up elements of the offense of election fraud that was committed in Ohio by an Ohio resident. To the extent Saunders advanced this jurisdictional argument for the 2022 general election as well, this court must reach the same conclusion it did for the 2020 presidential election. Saunders requested a vote by mail ballot from Broward County and directed that it be mailed to a 16210 Shaker Heights Boulevard, Shaker Heights, Ohio, 44120 address. Saunders received a ballot, signed it on November 5th of 2022, and it was received back by the Broward County Board of Elections on November 5th of 2022. This court can infer from the admitted evidence that Saunders received the Broward County, Florida ballot at his Shaker Heights residence, completed the ballot while in Ohio, and mailed it back to Broward County, Florida. Saunders then voted in person at Woodbury Elementary School in Shaker Heights on November 8th of 2022. During the 2022 general election, both the initial act of voting, his vote by mail ballot from Broward County, Florida, and his subsequent act of voting, his in-person vote in Cuyahoga County, occurred in Ohio. Thus, this court has jurisdiction over this offense, as one or more elements of the offense of election fraud were committed in Ohio. Saunders next argues that votes cast in both Cuyahoga County, Ohio, and Broward County, Florida, cannot be considered at the same election. However, as previously discussed, federal law designates the first Tuesday after the first Monday in even-numbered years as election day in each of the states and territories within the United States for the month of November. The elections at issue, in this case, the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election, and the November 8, 2022 general election are the countrywide elections prescribed by this federal law. Thus, Saunders voted at the same election during both of these elections. Saunders argues that he could not have voted at the same election during either the 2020 presidential election or the 2022 general election because both ballots contain local or statewide issues that are particular to these two states. Thus, he argues, his actions could not have been done at the same election when his ballots concerned issues that were not common to each other. However, advancing Saunders' theory to its logical conclusion, Ohio's election fraud statute would only apply to an individual who voted or attempted to vote more than once within the same municipality. Interpreting the phrase "at the same election" in such a restrictive way cannot be what the legislature intended when it enacted Revised Code 3599.12. Even within Cuyahoga County, each municipality has different local issues that are not common to all of Cuyahoga County. For example, the elections held in Shaker Heights for city council members or for school levy increases are not common to those same elections in Cleveland or Parma or Westlake, all of which are still within Cuyahoga County. If this court accepted Saunders' argument, a Shaker Heights resident can only be convicted of election fraud under Revised Code 3599.12 if he or she voted more than once in the same Shaker Heights election where the two ballots contained identical issues. The legislature could not have intended such an absurd result when it enacted Revised Code 3599.12, and this court rejects that argument. The evidence presented here, Mr. Saunders, is overwhelming and proves you guilty of election fraud both during the 2020 presidential election and the 2022 general election. You have violated with impunity one of our most cherished rights, that every citizen in this country, regardless of race, creed, or socioeconomic status, speaks with one voice and one vote. Sir, your opinion does not outweigh any of us other fellow citizens. You do not have any greater right than any other fellow citizen in this country. This court hereby finds you guilty of counts 1 and 2 in the indictment. Furthermore, this court revokes your bond. You are remanded to the custody of the sheriff. This court is setting sentencing for August 28th at 10 a.m. I'm going to command the parties, order the parties, if they choose to submit a sentencing memorandum, to do so to the court by noon this Friday, August 25th. Once again, sentencing will be set for Monday, August 28th at 10 a.m. Furthermore, Mr. Hurley, pursuant to Revised Code 120.05 and 120.15D, I'm ordering the county public defender make the results of their indigency determination available to the court for review prior to Monday's sentencing hearing. Anything further, Mr. Hurley?
Yes, if I may. First of all, I would have asked the court to consider a pre-sentence investigation report. Obviously, we wouldn't have time to do that if you're going to proceed to sentencing next Monday. Second of all, I want to point out to you that I did advise Mr. Saunders, not only does this impact perhaps his employment status, but also his status as a lawyer in the state of Ohio, and have advised him that if the court is to find him guilty, that he is to contact the Ohio Disciplinary Office and report that conviction. It's certainly worth noting that at some point there may be the issue of an appeal, but as it stands right now, I understand and acknowledge the court's concern. I would say that remanding him today, it seems, dare I say, premature. I mean, he hasn't taken any steps since he was here at the time of our trial. He hasn't given you any cause for concern during the course of this case. I would submit to you that at this point I would ask you not to remand him and allow him to be walking into this courtroom on Monday with me. Thank you.
Mr. Grosky, anything for the record of this juncture?
Just a note for the court that Obviously, there are ties to other states that Mr. Saunders has, whether the court has already considered that as part of its decision to remand Mr. Saunders, but ultimately the state would trust the discretion of the court and would intend to prepare a sentencing memorandum by Friday at noon.
Thank you.
One more point.
Go ahead, Mr. Hurley.
As I had indicated to the court prior to our trial, that if this court is concerned that he does not qualify for the service of the Cuyahoga County Public Defender's Office, there is and has always been a mechanism to address that issue. And it would indeed require, number one, a determination not only of what his current income is, but also what my efforts were as his lawyer, I suppose. It would be the first time in my 27-year career that I would submit something akin to a fee bill, I suppose. So I want the court to be aware of that. It's an unusual circumstance. I accept whatever client is handed to me, and I will describe Mr. Saunders as being a very thoughtful one over the course of this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hurley. I am not ordering a pre-sentence investigation report. I am remanding Mr. Saunders, and sentencing will be at Monday, August 28th at 10 a.m.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Wow.
Court is adjourned as to this matter.
Dan DeRose with 19 News. Judge Andrew Santoli sending a message to James Saunders. His attorney tried to get him from going to county jail today as ordered by the judge, saying he has to do some things on the outside and that he can't do that while being locked up. The judge wanted no part of it, said, nope, you're going in, and that they wanted the sentencing date delayed a little bit so that a pre-sentence investigation could be done. Pre-sentence investigations, generally psychological evaluations are done. They calculate a number for you. That's your risk of reoffending. There's a whole equation that goes into there. The judge not ordering a pre-sentence investigation, saying, no, you will be sentenced Monday, the 28th, not wasting any time. I thought it was important that you heard the judge say that you do not have any more say than any other citizen in this country. And for you to think that you can say, oh, I forgot that I voted twice, or perhaps it doesn't count if these are elections in different states because you have different issues on the ballot in Shaker Heights as you do as opposed to down in Broward County. They tried everything in this case to say that they were different ballots, different counties. They tried to say you don't have jurisdiction here in Ohio because he voted legally here in Ohio first, and then they're trying to say that he voted illegally in Florida second. The judge said no, this is ultimate jurisdiction because the act was part of the crime. Sentencing will be Monday, guilty on 2 counts of illegal voting. And let's talk about the elephant in the room. While there are major accusations nationwide and by some former presidents about major election fraud, this is the first case that we have seen prosecuted in the state, or at least in Cuyahoga County, anytime recently. And this is clearly someone who was caught voting in both Florida and in Ohio and trying to vote multiple times. So James Saunders, who is an attorney, probably won't be for much longer. His law license will be at stake here. More than likely will be disbarred by the state of Ohio after now being convicted of voter fraud. We will, of course, try and bring you that sentencing on Monday, live here on our digital platforms. Until then, I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News Now. Have a great afternoon.
19 News is everywhere. Download our CTV apps and follow us on social media